representing customers, and we had rooms representing teams. And then I got a phone call from the project management office. Hey, can we get on that HipChat thing? Why, yes, you can. And it was cool. And what they really loved is they loved watching the builds go by. They loved going, oh, hey, look, the build's broken. I know somebody's working on that problem. Oh, look, click. Oh, okay, they're working on that thing. They didn't have to bug the developers. They didn't have to make a phone call. Better yet, the project managers didn't have to schedule meetings, which engineers hate. So all of that, because I started with a philosophy, and only at the end did I figure out what tool it was that we wanted to use. So I always start here and end here. So an economic observation. We all know that profit is equal to revenue minus cost. That was economics in high school, right? But here's an interesting fact. If you can drive cost to zero, you're out of business. Think about that for a minute, right? No matter how much you want to save money, there is a floor. And if you get below the floor, you're damaging your ability to compete. So revenue, on the other hand, has no ceiling, theoretically anyway, right? But we tend to spend an awful lot of time trying to save money. That's because that's a very easy conversation to have, right? Especially when your budget is millions and you say, I can save you $1 million. That sounds like a lot of money. Technology versus tools. All right? Tools are the result of implementing a DevOps model. In other words, we implemented HipChat because the model that we wanted to subscribe to was improving our culture via communication. Technology enables the creation of better tools. So technology enables new business models and new DevOps models. Tools are simply an expression of those models. So we talk about columns, culture and automation and all this stuff. One of the things I think is missing there is virtualization. A lot of people will argue, well, that's automation. I'm not sure. So that's a bit about what this talk is about.
What is comms?
Comms is Patrick Dubois came up with CAMS: culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. That's what DevOps is. Dubois being the genesis, the original DevOps. And then somebody else added meaning to it after the book, the Phoenix Project came out. And so it becomes comms. So technology versus tools. Virtualization is great. It's a technology. We see the tools, VMware, AWS, Roku. Configuration management came along, okay. CF Engine, nobody understood that. You Puppet and Chef, things become a little more doable. Continuous integration, great set of tools there. We do where we have continuous integration as a service. That's pretty awesome. Continuous delivery, same thing. Circle CI is trying to move down here. I find it interesting that Jess Humble's book, Continuous Delivery, came out like 5 years ago. Really changed the world, if you will. But there still aren't really great tools for truly continuous delivery. Service discovery is the new grad hotness, especially in a microservice architecture. Zookeeper implements Paxos. Paxos was a white paper that was never meant to be implemented in terms of consensus protocols. You have SED and console. Those implement Raft. Raft was actually, the white paper Raft was meant to be implemented. So things, again, are getting better, more easy to run, more easy to understand what's going on. And then containers, jails. How many of you don't know what CH jail is? Sweet. Yeah, we're all over it. 1982. This container idea is not new. Okay? Then BSD jails. Probably, you can make an argument they're more fully featured than a Docker container. 1998. Solaris Zones, 2005. Docker really just relevant about a year ago. It really just went to 1.0 about a year ago, and ultimately that doesn't matter because if you went through the 1.3 and 1.4 upgrade, ouch, that hurt. So they're still trying to work it out too. This is very early days. So a couple more things. Language matters. We do our self-disservice by talking about problems by the tools that we're using. Instead of talking about, we should be talking about solving the configuration management issue rather than writing chef code or implementing a Puppet management. It's only by doing this that we get to the best solution possible. In other words, if we start with, I want to implement Puppet, without thinking about the configuration management problem that we have to solve, we can end up choosing the wrong tool. Okay? Puppet is known to break down at about 500 hosts. Chef, because of all the work Facebook has put into it, is known to go to thousands and thousands of hosts. So right there, you have a nice comparison. Right? When people ask me, I say, Puppet. Well, if you're a group of system administrators trying to drop configuration management, I think you're going to find Puppet to be the way you think. It's going to be comfortable to you. If you're a developer trying to drop configuration management, I think you're going to find Chef or Ansible to be much more comfortable to you. So again, where are we starting from? What's our culture look like? What are we trying to automate? That's what's going to inform what we should do, and only then should we choose the tool. So how do we get into these situations? Well, good tools enable technology use. First, there was TF Engine. Does anybody understand promise theory? I was reading math and I don't understand promise theory. Okay? Then there was Puppet, and Puppet was so much better, and it became this thing. And then a couple of guys looked at Puppet and went, that's not right. And then so out of Jenkins went, we're going to write Chef. And so now they're Chef. And so you have these two basic paradigms, Puppet and Chef, kind of duking it out. And then Ansible is over here going, hey, we do it a whole lot easier and a whole lot better in certain situations, right? And this is great. We have competition, and I got maybe we'll actually put money on some point. VMware was amazing, and it's amazingly expensive. It is not available to the masses. Sliceos was the first real public cloud, but it was really hinky. I know because I ran production systems in it for a year. And then along came AWS, and kaboom, the public cloud is the thing, right? Everybody is in the public cloud. Well, not everybody, but everybody who thinks they have. No, all the people in San Francisco. Yeah, that's okay. So, so you have again, AWS really brings the public cloud to the mere world. And then you have LXC. Has anybody read the man page, LXC or Secrets? Well, if you want to see what it's like to have your eyes read it or read it. I'm sorry? Started to read it? Okay, so your eyes actually bleed, mine did. Yeah, if you want to feel what it's like to say, actually have your eyes bleed, just try and read the Secrets man page. It's fascinating. Or not. So what did Docker do? Docker came along and enables Linux containers by mere words. Thus, it makes containerization a technology that we can build a DevOps model around. Okay, when we want to automate things, we can now consider containers without having to have rock star engineers available to us. Build the voices of the world, if you will. So, Docker and DevOps and the business. Linux containers for mere mortals. Yay. So again, comms, culture, automation, lean, measurement, sharing. You get DevOps everywhere. All right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to define an opportunity. I'm going to discuss some of the benefits, some of the concerns, explore the business perspective from the perspective of the people that we've been talking to. Is Nat Gutman here? I was just talking to your colleague today, Bob Bush. Yeah. So those sorts of conversations that we've had, 1 hour, 2 hour, 5 hour conversations with various businesses, from the Disneys of the world to these tiny little startups in Austin, about what they've been doing, available tools out there if they exist. Again, it's very early days, and what adoptions are looking like, what direction adoptions are coming from, and what benefits people are seeing if they do actually do this. So from a culture perspective, microservices mean micro teams. So if you're not familiar with the term microservice, the microservice architecture is where each process has a single purpose. So back in the day, we had spaghetti. You have this big spaghetti code, big web sphere, one big monolithic application with lots of activation paths, basically how you run it, configure it, and do all these things. Then we got the service-oriented architecture. And what's really I find really interesting is you go to do a shop and go, we have a service-oriented architecture, and then you look at their code and they understand. Because it's hard. Developers can, and I'll put this aside, microservices are like cupcakes. So I'm sorry, you have this pie, right? Well, here's the problem. This is a cherry pie. If I don't want it to be written in cherry, if I want it to be written in coffee, I can't do that without changing the nature of the entire pie. When you get to microservices, you have cupcakes. They're individual things. So I can make a cherry cupcake, and I can make a vanilla cupcake, and a chocolate cupcake. It doesn't matter. As long as I honor the external interface between each of these things, I can change whatever I want, whatever language it's written in, etc. Yes?
Service-oriented architecture. I don't change anything out.
Well, what I can change is the nature of the actual ingredients. If I change cherry here, I'm changing the entire pie, right? I can't have one. I can't bake a pie with one slice of cherry.
That's not what I thought of service-oriented architecture. That's the whole idea. Was you can change it to whatever you want as long as it's the same service.
The services are happening at the code level, not at the infrastructure level. And so you're assuming essentially, in a service-oriented architecture, essentially assumes that you're using a single programming language, which is where a lot of people go.
Well, I mean, Amazon implemented a service-oriented architecture in 2002, made the transition over the next 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. It did not have to be in the same language. Jeff Bezos would have hit the roof if everything had to be in the same language.
Well, okay. No, you're right. I'm being imprecise, so let me be a bit more precise. The unicorns of the world, in Google, Amazon, Netflix, yes, they have been able to essentially do that. However, when you think about what Amazon's really done, they've gotten to a microservice level where each of these things is really only doing one thing, right? So they're, yeah. So what are the benefits? Well, code to the interface, the whole service-oriented, call to arms, it moves to the infrastructure level. So instead of having to write code a certain way, I just have to write the application so any calls to it behave and give me a certain format, certain outputs, and I'm in good shape. All right? So microservice teams then can move at their own pace. This is really key because what happens is, if this is a critical feature, for instance, it's where the buy button is on the page. And where that buy button is on the page matters in terms of how many people are going to push it. Okay? They can change this without changing any of these things because the function of the buy button doesn't change underneath. So they can move this very, very rapidly based on what marketing is telling them. And they can, so if you got Home Depot over here, and you got Lowe's over here, and Home Depot being able to move faster, providing a better online shopping experience to its customers, Home Depot is going to win in the online shopping game. If they win the online shopping game, they're going to win the physical shopping game eventually as well. Amazon is taking over the world there. So this also eases the Mythical Man Month problem. If you've never read the white paper, the Mythical Man Month, it's not really worth buying the book. You can get the white paper online for free. I think this was 1958 from IBM. Basically, what they argue is if you just throw more people at a problem, you eventually are going to end up slowing down because you have this combinatoric issue of communication. You were talking about the number of bits in configuration files and so forth and so on. Same problem just done with people. So imagine now that you have all these cupcakes around, and you only need to facilitate communication between one cupcake team and another cupcake team if there is a breaking change. Otherwise, those teams can move at their own pace. And because those teams are small, 2, 3, 5 people, they're self-organizing. A project manager doesn't have to reach into that team and help them communicate, set meetings, et cetera, et cetera. They're self-organized. The only thing a project manager has to do is schedule meetings when breaking changes occur. This is a big deal because instead of having 50 people and trying to manage all the permutations, you now have, let's say, teams of 3, so you have 15. That's a much smaller problem. 15 factorials, far smaller than 50 factorials. So feature velocity increases. And make no mistake, if you believe that you are a technology company and you believe that you have to gain a competitive advantage there, features are the coin of the realm. Right? The faster you can get a feature in front of a customer, the faster that feature can allow you to sell the next customer or allow you to upsell a new license to an existing customer and so forth and so on, make you money. But if you only accelerate developers, if you only think to yourself, if I can just make the developers go faster, there are more features, no. It's called production because that's where it produces money. So if a developer writes more and more and more and more code, and it sits in Git and sits in Git and sits in Git and sits in Git, well, let's say I've got you've given me a week's worth of work, and you're $100 an hour, and you. So now I have $4,000, $8,000, $12,000 sitting in Git. It's not producing anything, but it isn't in production. So if I just accelerate the developers, I've only achieved what Goldrat would call a local optimum. That's this lean thing again. And what that means is I haven't actually impacted anything. So when you're considering a Docker adoption, you got to watch out there. Talk about that in a bit more. Concerns. Few coders understand code to the interface, like I was saying before. And they're really only unicorns to reason from. And those unicorns are really intimidating unicorns, not the nice fancy ones that fart rainbows and all that stuff. So migration of existing apps is also pretty high risk, especially the apps that are truly making you money. And that's a tough sell. What CTO is going to say, yeah, I'll risk my career on a Docker adoption, woohoo, right? And what business wants to do that? Is it going to make me money? And is that money worth the risk? So what about a business perspective? Okay, there's an extraordinary increase in dev team velocity, and that means a competitive advantage. The difficulty of adoption means that this is a lasting advantage. That's really critical here, okay? Because, yeah, I can go and get the new cool hotness, but if everybody can go and get the new cool hotness, what have I really gained in the market, right? I'm only keeping up. In this case, if you're one of the first people on the bus, you're giving your company a big advantage if you can reach the microservice nirvana. But can you? Is that even feasible in your organization or in part of your organization? So what I recommend is dip a toe in a low-risk application. This is what we're seeing all over the place. Okay, at one startup in Austin, they sell, they're like a clearinghouse for storage space. So did they take their clearinghouse application and convert that to Docker? No. They took their customer service application, which can be down, a little bit here and there, and they converted that. And they are learning. And they're getting a lot of great information. And they have determined that eventually they are going to do a Docker adoption. But not until they know more, because things keep failing on them and they don't have good reasons why. So that's a really common adoption path that we're seeing. The tools out there are no tools to convert your existing application to microservices. That's just blood, sweat, and tears.
That's
Yes.
barefoot, right, or something.
Oh, I didn't say that.
But
I can't say that.
But their failure rate is higher now that they're Dockerizing customer service?
The failure rate of the customer service application is higher because they are learning how to use Docker. So Docker isn't the root cause of the problem, the adoption is.
But at the beginning, Docker is causing more errors because they don't understand it well enough. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, in their situation, yes. But they picked that application so they could understand it better. They picked a low-risk application.
Are you going to cover, like, what kind of errors can be caused just the fact that you're using Docker?
I wasn't planning on going that deep into the technology here, but I can certainly talk to you afterwards. Fair enough? Okay. Stuff in a lot of companies, offers.com, this is one I can talk about. They actually came and spoke at Docker Austin. They take 30 million uniques, except in November with Black Friday. They're a retail company. 30 million uniques a month on average. And that's about 500 million hits a month. So on 9 Amazon C3 largest. And they have a bunch of Docker containers. Instead of trying to microservice everything, they just took their entire PHP application, stuffed it into the Fusion container, and activate the various paths of the application through different calls to the containers. So rather than trying to drink all of their microservice Kool-Aid, they wanted to move everything to Docker right away because that's the way that company is. They're a ragged, leading-edge kind of company. They moved the entire thing, and rather than trying to rewrite the application and absorbing all that risk, that's where they mitigated risk. They ran into a lot of problems with orchestration. They had some downtime and so forth and so on. And then they hit Nirvana, and they are very happy. When they know that this year when Black Friday comes, they're going to hit a couple of buttons, watch it scale up, and if somebody's beeper goes off, beeper, did I say beeper? I'm really that old, sorry. When somebody's phone goes off, they're going to hit a few more buttons, and a few more machines are going to go up, boom, scale, really cool. So they know they're in good shape. They're using Mesosphere, they're using Docker, and again, they're using certain containers that mean that they don't have to rewrite their entire PHP application. Another way to mitigate risk. So the other thing we have some people doing is bringing in some help. We've gone to HomeAway and just sat down and talked with them about their logging problem. And they were like, wow, this was great. Yeah, thanks. It was just, we bought them lunch, had a great talk. They gave us a whole bunch of feedback about the product. Everybody walked away happy. If you're looking for help, if you want help walking through a Docker adoption, give us a call. We'll be happy to buy you lunch, sit down, listen to your problem, answer your questions, go from there. And if you haven't read it yet, go check out 12factor.net. It's the Heroku guys. They wrote about a 30-page white paper that just says, this is what an application should look like in a 12-factor way, which really informs the Docker microservice. Okay? You won't agree with everything. I know I went ballistic at no configuration files, only environment variables. I mean, I hit the roof. My wife was like, what's wrong with you? Okay? But,
Have you come around?
I have. Not for all cases, right? But I have. And there are also really good tools out there that will dynamically rewrite a configuration file, conft being the one by CoreOS that most people are using in that space. That will also help you without having to do that. So, but read it, because what it does is it says to you, this is where the world is moving. This is where the unicorns are going. So maybe my horse should move that way too. So, adoption. Shops are experimenting with whole apps in the container first. I mentioned offers.com. And I think that's WebSphere. No, that's not WebSphere. I forget what that is now. Greenfield startups are designing for microservices as well. We've run into, Austin's a big startup incubator. We've run into a number of places that started with Docker. And they started with Docker when Docker was like 0.6. So they've seen all the warts, right? But they've grown with Docker, and only now are they getting customers. So their risk wasn't monetary risk. Their risk was not getting to market fast enough. But what most of them have said is, we feel that Docker gave us a competitive advantage because we could try things faster, throw them away faster, and get to where we wanted to be faster. So in the end, even though they had to learn a new thing, they feel like they got where they wanted to be faster. Many service companies are springing up to help you with containerization. Is Docker a good fit for you?
Is there any contrast in terms of that advantage versus LXC?
So LXC is hard. That's the only thing. So if you have the engineering chops to go out to CNC groups, I'd tell you, yeah, go for it. And I'll give you one really good reason. To run a Docker container, you have to run a Docker daemon. That's a big attack surface, right? So if you have the chops to run LXC, go for it. And I'll talk a little bit about an LXC in the corner here at the end.
LXC, snapshots that.
Oh yeah, because basically what Docker did was Docker originally implemented LXC, and they were just trying to make it easier for everyone. But implementing LXC is hard. It's and then when you want to start controlling how much CPU and memory and whatnot you get, it gets really crazy really fast. So there are shops out there that are doing it. Those are Twitter, Facebook, Pantheon, Google. Well, no, I'm not sure if Google's using LXC. They have LMCTFY. Let me containerize that for you. And their own technology. So I'm not sure if Google is actually using LXC or they make something of their own, which is pretty typical for Google. I gotta find out. I know
is LXC what you build on, or is it the same level?
LXC is very low-level kernel feature.
That's what I thought.
Right. And then you have to compare that with seed groups to get the functionality you want, which is I can contain the process, and then I can.
That man page.
Yeah.
Didn't get very
seed groups. That one's even worse, I think. So, I'm sorry. Automation is the next DevOps pillar. Comms. So culture automation. Faster delivery means more innovation. So building test grids are a big deal. Container days. The vast majority of people that stopped me while I was running around doing all the organizer stuff were telling me that their adoption had come through build and test. And it's what I found interesting was they could move orthogonally to the entire organization. In other words, they could adopt containers with a lot of work on their part without affecting development or production to the benefit of the company. And that's the only time I've heard that actually. It's kind of interesting. So yes, sir.
But like Sparefoot or the unnamed company wasn't able to pull that off. Why
they didn't choose to pull it off. Okay. That's not how they looked at it, how they wanted to go about learning about it.
So knowing in advance, if you do the right thing, you won't disrupt your organization.
So let me be really clear. I'm not trying to pass judgments or say you should do it this way. What I'm trying to do is give you this broad view of what lots of people have done, so that you can say to yourself, hey, "That's the way that fits for me. That's what I want to reason."
Okay, but it is an existence group that sufficiently smart people without disrupting their organization. Is that weird?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So,
but the unnamed place.
I've got another unnamed one for you. Sorry. Consider the set of all app versions and environments if you don't know what a test grid is, and you get especially if you're installing software, you get a very large combinatorial grid very quickly. An example of that would be think of all the Ruby versions you might want to run in production across your typical, your most common guests in AWS, and you quickly get to 20. Now, are you going to be able to test all of those? Well, maybe. So at a particular vendor, I'm sorry, this is really important to install software like Stack Engine. We have this problem. So at one vendor we went to, one very large vendor, they had a 1,000 physical machine test grid. And they were spinning up VMs all over the place trying to keep all the testing, and they couldn't keep up. So this guy went and he Dockerized WebSphere. I couldn't believe it. I was just like, you did that. How did you do that? So that's kind of amazing, right? He Dockerized WebSphere. Got testing times down from 28 hours to 3 hours. Took the number of machines, 1,000, down to 10. That's pretty significant, right? So yeah, that's a cost savings. That's a cost savings we're paying attention to. Not only in power, but in CapEx, right? That's kind of neat. So, what are some of the benefits? Well, containers start in less than a second. So, whereas if some developer pushed something in, they had to wait for several minutes for all the virtual machines to spin up. If it's all Docker containers, it takes a second. Really, actually, it takes about 50 milliseconds. You can test more permutations of the same system. So right now, basically in the real world, we're all making choices. Okay, most of our customers are on Ruby 2.1, and most of our customers are using Ubuntu. So we'll do all those. And then we know that one bitchy customer is on Red Hat, so we'll test that real quick. Okay, we're good. And then anything else is customer support. Okay, Docker can make that a bit better. We also get to increase build parallelism, and this, of course, will lead to an increase in virtualization because we can tighten the feedback between the developer and the build itself. We can increase feature velocity and with those things. I love increasing. So what are the concerns here? The big one is in QA. Sapinski's triangle. Is the test bed going to be close enough to the actual production system, right? So if all of these are containers, but then when I step back, I'm running it in production, all of these are virtual machines, have I as QA modeled production closely enough to say, yes, this thing is good enough? And again, that's something to consider. It's a concern that QA has had. Keep in mind, though, that QA is one of the people driving this, which is really kind of cool. QA innovating? When does that ever happen? So, impedance. How does the app get from prod if not via container? So your developers have created a Docker image, and your build team has built a Docker image, and your QA people have tested a Docker image, and now you're going to go run it in production as installed software. Ouch. Right? So now, we've seen a lot of places that have really mature delivery pipelines. They're smaller companies who've completely adopted CI and CD. Excuse me. And so what they're doing is they're saying, oh, yeah, well, we've got that whole thing. We're good right now. We understand that we have parity, or parity is close enough, and they're moving forward. All right, so others are going, ugh, right? Those tend to be more enterprisey customers who have compliance issues, security issues, or uptime, performance issues like medical equipment and stuff like that.
Pacemaker.
Yeah, Docker and a pacemaker. Probably sooner or later. Grid density, of course, lowers costs. The vendor I was talking about, that was significant. He estimated it at about $1.2 million for the year, and greater as those machines went to end of life. I was stunned. Increased innovation due to build time decrease. Again, if a developer, think about it, developer hits go and knows he's going to get something back in 2 minutes. He's going to sit there and wait. Developer hits go and knows he's going to get something back in 15 minutes. He's going to go get coffee. He's going to interrupt his buddy next door, play ping pong. So, shorter build times, more development time. We get increased feature velocity. Here's one of those unicorns. So eBay, they don't use feature branches, they use feature flags. The feature flag goes right in the code. So building and testing is going on constantly. And so they use all this crazy parallelism, and bam, that's how eBay happens. They're releasing it right underneath you as you're making a purchase. Absolutely crazy. Intuit does the same thing with TurboTax during tax season. Does that blow your mind? Blows my mind. If you haven't read the Lean Startup, it's actually a really cool book, even if you're in the enterprise, because they talk a lot about Intuit. And then Jez Humble, the author of Continuous Delivery, he just wrote Lean Enterprise, which is Lean for the enterprise software. So another great book, and he's a really good author as well. He's actually working at Chef now. This decreases the QA bottleneck. Now, let's, I pick on QA constantly, even though I've run plenty of QA teams in my life. QA's job is to say, no, that sucks, do it over. I mean, right? That's their job is to make sure it is of quality. And we all, in every part of the organization, tend to look at them as, yeah, you're a pain in the ass. But really, they're saving us from ourselves. That's really, really important. And in this particular case, QA is looking at this going, we can get out of the middle. We can go and not be the people that everybody is waiting on again. That's really, really cool, okay? Because we can further automate tests and we can get feedback even faster. What are the tools out there? Of course, the big tool everybody knows about is Jenkins, right? That's the installed one. I hate Java applications, so I have a hard time recommending it, but they do have the best Docker story right now. If you want to try something without having to install and run Jenkins on yourself, CloudBees is Jenkins in the cloud. It's Jenkins as a service. It's really done well. It's a little expensive, but if you have a budget and you have an R&D budget, I would start with CloudBees if you're not already running your own Jenkins stuff. Circle CI is really doing a great job. Again, if you want to go into the cloud, and Shippable is catching up. Artifact management is still really immature. This is that whole continuous delivery instead of continuous integration part of things. Artifact repositories, the Docker registry and key.io. Key was just bought by CoreOS. And then Artifactory has come along, and I've been told, I haven't tried it yet myself, that Artifactory is actually the best Docker registry out there. Thought that was kind of neat. Artifactory isn't terribly expensive. If you're already running Java applications, you probably are fairly familiar with Artifactory. So that's a place to put your stuff, right? However, delivery is unsolved. I've gone all the way through my build pipeline. I have this container image, and bam, it goes into a registry. Okay, still not production. How do I get it out of the? How does my production application know in an automatic way that a change has happened? It has a new version of the thing available, and then it can deploy it, and how to deploy it if it can. I call that the final mile. Nobody's solved that yet, and that's actually something that we're working on. I know that Circle CI and Shippable are also working on it as well. So, adoption. This is a really common adoption path as well. It's driving legacy apps to containers, WebSphere, of course, being the one that's just mind-boggling to me. I had to run WebSphere once, and I'm just not that smart. So those of you who raised your hand, I am in awe of you. Production adoption creates impedance. So now we're looking at your operations people, your sysadmins going, whoa, what's this Docker thing, and how do I even deal with it? Which is important, right? They're not being sticks in the mud. They're saying, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to keep us running. I don't know how to keep us in business if something goes bad. So this is real. We need to deal with this. It's done with no impact to other teams. That was really interesting to me. Many people were saying, I just built a test grid, jammed a bunch of stuff into the container so that I could make this happen really fast. And then the QA team came along and said, yes, this is good enough. And anything that hasn't been good enough, we've taken that as learning and we've moved forward. Configuration management simplification. We need to automate. So what is configuration management? In a nutshell, it's automating the state of a single machine so that you always know what state a single machine is. It's not orchestration, although every configuration management tool these days has dabbling in orchestration because that's where they want to make their money. Ansible has Tower. Chef is, I forget what they're doing now, but they've got all this stuff with the Chef server you can do. Puppet has Hyra. So, but ultimately, configuration management is about the state of one machine. What are the benefits here? Well, the learning curve of a typical CM tool is extremely steep. I'm a Chef lover. I'm a Chef contributor. I get to go to Chef Summit, yada, yada, yada. Most of what I contribute to them now is curriculum because Chef has to train. They have to offer training. They'll give it away if you know how to ask them because it's so bloody hard to learn. So I spent 6 weeks learning Chef, and I had people in IRC sitting with me for hours sometimes trying to figure out what I was doing wrong or if it was a bug or something like that. Now, Chef has gotten a lot better since then because I was a pointy type. But the point is, it's hard. And the difficulty of Puppet and Chef is representative of the difficulty of the configuration management problem. So I find interesting, yes, sir.
I'm not sure what the difference is between configuration management and orchestration.
So configuration management is about one machine. Orchestration is about how many machines speak to each other. So the easy example is I have a simple web application that's one load balancer, 2 web nodes, and a database. Okay, so the database has to come up first, then the load balancer, and then the 2 web nodes for everything to sew together. Otherwise, the application probably won't start because it'll freak out. I can't find my database.
So that's like at a higher level than a Chef recipe. The recipe can't order.
So that's where things get
muddled.
muddled.
How recipes work?
So a Chef recipe configures the state of a machine, but in a recipe, but this is where it gets muddled. In a Chef recipe, you can call out to the Chef server and say, "Where's my database?" And
that'll fire off.
right, and so you get this sort of mild form of orchestration, right? So yeah, very fast. So some people argue that orchestration is NP incomplete, but nobody's been able to prove that yet. So it's kind of an interesting math problem. Docker obviates the need for most host configuration. You get the bakery mark. So what's interesting, so containers are configured via a simple batch-like file. So that's a Docker file, and really it's all batch. You just see a few apt-gets there, and then you have pulling in some resource from GitHub. Life is good. So what are the concerns? Well, the big one is the Docker to configure your container. And the answer is, well, you don't always have to meet complexity with power. Okay? There are other ways to do that. So if you're truly adopting microservice architecture, each of your containers is just running one process. It doesn't need a lot of complexity. It just needs what it needs. So this means that the Docker file, in most cases, has been good enough for us. How do you transition from updating in place to immutable releases? Okay, so one of the big things that Docker promises is instead of trying to update your container, you just stop it, you put a new one up there, and it's running, and life is good. You don't even care that the old one is still there. Because if the new one fails, you can always stop it, start the old one to roll back. It's called an A/B deployment. So this is a really big deal. Woohoo, immutable infrastructure, right? Of course, everybody see the hand waving? What about your database? Yeah. Go ask Docker, and they say, you should talk to the Cluster HQ guys. And the Cluster HQ guys go, yeah, we're working on that. We just got $12 million. So Yeah, it's not exactly a well-answered question yet.
Well, apparently orchestration is the same problem.
Yes.
Order matters and state is in the order.
So the first Chef Summit I went to, I followed Adam Jacob around. He does this thing called Choose Your Own Adventure, which I really think he's an amazing speaker, right? And so every time he'd say, "What do you want to talk about?" I'd yell, "Orchestration," and he'd yell back, "Orchestration is hard. Let's talk about something else." Now this is the guy who thought up and wrote Chef. That's a smart dude, right? So yeah. So configuration management, simplification. What does the business think of this? The removal of complexity lowers release and administrative risk. So if you got Puppet everywhere, and you've got all these crazy manifests, you got Puppet applying this and Puppet applying that. That's a little scary, right? Especially because Puppet's hard to grok. It's hard to go and get really great Puppet engineers and so forth. The same thing with Chef. So if you have immutable infrastructure and you just stop one and start another, that's a much simpler thing, right? No more update, just delete and insert. Well, we're controlling risk. Scaling issues of most CM tools are moot. Chef is scaling really well due to Facebook, but really, there is an upper limit somewhere, and we're going to find it. That's not going to be an issue with Docker. Okay? It exists on every machine. You just Docker file, Docker build, Docker go. That's good. And I'm waving my hands a little bit there. So, what about the tools? Well, the first tool is basically a model, which is the bakery model for hosts, right? The Docker file for containers, it's a tool. Multi-host image management. Tudum, Stack Engine, and Fleet are the only ones that I know of who can take a Docker image and run it on multiple machines from a single click of a button. So when you get to Docker Compose and you write your beautiful YAML file, and you're all excited to launch your infrastructure, and it's all orchestrated, and woohoo, and it only works on one machine. Damn. Swarm, I can't get Swarm to work. Now, I have to admit that I've only played with it for about 8 hours. Yeah. Right, so Swarm should do what Tudum and Stack Engine and Fleet are doing. And allegedly, it's going to schedule straight away, which is really nice because Kubernetes and Mesos are so hard to run. So, question? Adoption. Companies who adopt Docker in production, well, they gradually realize they need CM less and less. This was exactly my experience at first. Of course, I'm a Chef guy. Sat down first day of Stack Engine, went, okay, we need web stuff. Banged out a couple Chef cookbooks. Poof, infrastructure. Then our CTO went and deleted all of our infrastructure. Oops. So ran the cookbooks. Poof, infrastructure's back. Woohoo! Go Chef. Over time, less and less and less until we just recently switched to CoreOS, and we'll eventually just delete those repositories that have the Chef cookbooks. We don't need them. It makes me sad because I'm such a fan of Chef, but really, they've completely gone away. This is true in every case we've encountered, including our own. And so the people that are doing this, they're finding they need configuration management less and less and less. Gosh, I feel like Dr. All right, measurement. So this is the fourth pillar of DevOps. Process density. This is the one that you can really easily make an argument to your CTO for because you can say, wow, we're only using 10% of any given machine. With Docker, we can use 90% of every machine. We need fewer machines, save money. Right? Definition.
He was already sold that 5 years ago.
I'm sorry?
He was already sold that 5 years ago.
Yeah, with the cloud, right?
Now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of hard to make the same argument again.
Oh, but no, this time it's really good.
10 years ago, was that virtual machine?
Yeah.
So another kind of, people kind of go, wow, with 1982 and when computers were kind of born. You know that IBM actually did the first virtualization in 1965? Isn't that mind-boggling? So we've had the ability to do a lot of this stuff for a long time. Yeah, and indeed, they're still trying to sell that. They'll still sell you big iron and virtualize them. So you can run Ubuntu on your AS400 or whatever it is these days. Density increases when the amount of compute on a host tends to zero. This really bit offers.com in the butt. They were like, woohoo, density, we're saving a ton of money in AWS. And then they got a traffic spike, and those machines that were sitting around at 10%, they would have just absorbed it. They had no room on the machines that were dense, and stuff started tipping over. Oops. So that was a learning that they took away, right? That wasn't a Docker failure. That was when they shifted their paradigm, they didn't shift all their thinking with the paradigm. I'm sorry?
That seems like kind of an obvious thing to should be concerned
I agree. You got to keep in mind to have one DevOps guy running the entire thing. Right? So when your head's down on that problem, sometimes it's hard to see. You lose your peripheral vision, right? And again, they're a company that chases the ragged bleeding edge as fast as they can. So reduce host consumption reduces costs, obviously. Reduce power footprint in large physical setting. And again, 2% of all power in the United States is consumed by data centers. So when you can take a large chunk of machines out of your infrastructure, machines physical, you can really save a lot of money and a lot of power. Concerns. Spare capacity is no longer there when spikes occur, like I was mentioning. So you get these unintended consequences. You get yet another complexity layer, right? So you got a data center on a comm, and then you have an availability zone, and then you have a rack, and you have a switch, and you have a machine, and then you have a virtual machine, and then you have a Docker container. Jesus, right? And so when things really go wrong down in the infrastructure somewhere, it can be very hard to dig your way down into it. So you don't have to run it all that way, right? I'm just saying that it's one more thing to think about. And I always ask myself really hard, do I need one more thing to think about before I go and stick it in there?
I mean, are doctors normally run inside virtual machines? Is that the way they
That's a really great question. The
That's
answer,
not the end point of this process, is it?
that's really interesting. So the question was, are Docker containers always run on virtual machines? And the answer is that in about, I'm thinking back across conversations, it's got to be at least 80% of the time. Yeah. And the reason that they're doing this is because I need more Docker containers. It's easy to spin up a virtual machine to be the host for those Docker containers, right? Whereas if you have bare metal, you run into all the racking and stacking problems that you would have if you need that next host. So capacity planning takes a step backwards in people's minds. I'm not really sure how that's working. And the thing, we were talking about OpenStack over here. OpenStack is actually working towards Docker containers as first-class virtualization systems. So you won't need the hypervisor to run those containers on bare metal eventually. Using something like OpenStack if you're using OpenStack Cloud, which means that places like Amazon, Rackspace, DigitalOcean will eventually probably move in the same direction. But right now, the flexibility of those virtual machines, being able to spin them up, bring them down, is alluring enough that people are running their Docker containers there.
But it doesn't need to be.
No. Indeed, the unicorn example I promised you later is on bare metal at Rackspace. So container sprawl. So we've all talked about cattle, not pets, right? We used to have a server, it got sick, you nurse it back to health. Oh, Betty, I love you, right? And it was cattle, not pets, right? So what happens if a server goes, belly up, take it out back, and you shoot it? Bang, steak, right? Well, in today's Docker world, instead of 1,000 cattle on my ranch, I'm going to have an uncountable number of ants. It's ants, not cattle. I don't care if it dies. I want a control plane that just sees that it died, starts another one by policy wherever it needs to be started, whatever data center, whatever continent, et cetera, make sure the right number of them are up. Alerts, sends me an alert.
That's like the Erlang solution.
Yeah, it sounds very telecom, doesn't it? And honestly, CoreOS, if you set up CoreOS, Fleet will do a little bit of this for you already. So if you're willing to go and grok systemd, yes, I know that's a dirty word, sorry. If you're willing to go and grok systemd, Fleet is just systemd distributed. Fleet will actually restart things for you and so forth, and it will message you if it can't get something restarted for whatever reason or can't find a place for it. So we call this container sprawl. Things get really crazy. Operations people need a new paradigm to manage all these processes because 1,000 things you can kind of keep in your head, and you know how to go look for them. 100,000 things, that's a different problem. So it's ants, not cattle. Business. Was a business? I'm sorry. Yes.
Before, isn't like the architecture thing on how much you want in a container, whether it should just be one process or whether it should be a collection? Has that all been settled and everybody's settling down on the one process, one thing exactly? Or what? I mean, isn't that part of the process density? Like how micro they are?
Density is really host. Right? How much of the CPU of the host are you actually able to activate consistently over time? But whether a container is a single process or a multi-process thing,
is one of those VI versus Emacs, MySQL versus Postgres.
So it's not going to settle down. You don't see an endpoint where everybody is one way.
No, basically what Docker themselves say is, do it feels good, man. And, very hippie, very hippie.
You don't want to turn anybody red.
Well, no, it really is true. It's true though. Like I was saying earlier, that storage company, they decided to just jam the whole thing into a container, as did Offers.com. Other companies have said, we're going to identify a low risk thing and break it into pieces.
I understand. Everything's in flux now. Do you see like 10 years from now that people just do one thing?
What are the best practices in the cloud right now? Exactly. Yeah. Well, okay. So, but they don't exist, right? The best practices in the cloud are to look at companies that look like you, look at organizations that have your risk profile and so forth and so on, and figure out what they did. Or
if you can.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you're the unicorn, to grab the horn and take the risk.
Isn't there an important distinction here between trying to shove a tool or a program inside of a container that actually spawns multiple processes as part of its,
like Apache?
Because you shove too much in there, it spawns multiple processes, versus programs like Apache that are designed to be multi-process or multi-thread, depending on your NPM, from the get-go. I mean, isn't there a fundamental difference between those two different types of multi-process environments?
Yes.
Is one worth avoiding versus the other in Docker, or are they both?
No.
Or is it unknown in both cases?
So remember
And
that
is
we're
it better
extremely early days, right? So there aren't best practices are the things that people are talking about in places like this. They don't exist yet. So my argument is the best practices is what make if you decide that Docker is something you should undertake, the best practice is the path that makes the most sense to you. Because there are tools out there, like if you want to run a multi-process PHP application, you can use supervisor D. So that's PID 1, and then it handles all the other processes that are going to go on in the container for you. You only have one PID inside the container no matter what. So supervisor D will take care of that. Conf D will take care of the dynamic rewriting of all the configuration files as you need to, and so forth.
Yes, I'm talking about that. I mean, imagine you shove Apache or MySQL into the container.
Okay.
You know, that you're not talking about some supervisor D spawning multiple children and stuff like that. You're talking about the application fundamentally being designed to be a multi-thread, multi-process architecture. It's this
right
model. I mean, that's how they do it.
That's right. So with Apache, I would avoid the conversation altogether by just saying run npm with threads instead of processes. Right. That's generally better anyway these days. With MySQL, I would avoid the argument by saying if you really want to run a database in a container.
Well, it's threads. MySQL uses threads also.
Yeah.
It uses lots of threads.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So, but let's say that for some reason, by policy, whatever, you had to run Apache in a multi-process environment. I don't know what would happen. I actually don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
So I'm just kind of curious about best practices because I know people talk about shoving systemd as process 1 or init as process 1 or something like that.
Yeah, run it or
inside systemd. Generally speaking, yes, I'm very avoidant of that. Mm-hmm. But I never thought about the idea of having a process that ground up was designed to be multi-process and shoving that into it.
Right. So I haven't tried it. So I haven't. It's not one of those things I thought, I want to go do that. No, I'm really, well, I am not.
I'm sure it works. I'm just kind of curious.
It's kind of part of my job is to go and like try some just crazy stuff like that. So that's gonna go on. I've got to try.
Did you say it's not a good idea to run whether you want to run a database inside a container?
So I have to qualify that. So I'm really trying to avoid absolutism here on purpose, which is unlike me. Being an evangelist and all. There's one and only one right way, and in the development environment, I think it's great to run your database in a container because it gives you that disposable development environment that we'll talk about in a while, right? But in a production environment, think about how a database is designed. Even if it's something as simple as MySQL or as complicated as Oracle, the software itself is designed to take up the entire machine, all the memory, all the I/O, all the CPU it can, by design. That's not a flaw. That's because that's what databases do. That's what they need. Why would I try and contain that? Why wouldn't I try and do everything I can to provide the whole machine to it so that it can function? And indeed, the Heroku guys, the 12factor.net guys, the guys I've talked to at Red Hat who are on Project Atomic, they're located in Austin, some of the Google people, what they're all saying is, the Flocker people, who is Cluster HQ above that, Flocker's the storage plugin for Docker that's supposed to help with a lot of this stuff. What they're saying is your microservices should not have state ever. And that you should have a data layer. That data should be something that you consume as a service. And so I love to throw RDS out there as the ultimate I have an endpoint that I hit, and I get MySQL. Woohoo, right? So that's what your data should look like. Your Hadoop cluster should be exposed the same way to your microservice architecture. And thus, you have a group of experts who are dealing with state, because that's what they deal with, and then you have a group of experts that are dealing with your microservices. And I am waving my hands here. Everybody see it? I'm trying to be honest. Okay. So that's what people are talking about. That's how Heroku expects your applications to operate out of the box. If you look at, if you're looking at Docker really seriously and you want to run your own platform as a service, you can look at Deis. And so Deis is basically Heroku, but it uses Docker containers, and you can install it right there on-prem, that sort of thing. Deis is making the same arguments now as well. So state is what you do elsewhere. Microservices avoid keeping state.
I've also heard that like you run the CPU of the database in the container, and then you attach the data volume, so the data is not actually in the container.
So that's it. Yeah.
But
So that's where
that's separate from what you were still saying. The whole machine goes to the data.
well, you've been trying to pin me down on best practice.
No, I know.
You just hit one. Actually, I can say this one for data. That's called a data volume container. You can look that up. You know, like you can actually go search on the program of data volume.
Technically, right?
So
Or-
yeah, like if you're running something that has state, you know, anything really, what you want to do is you want to separate the process, and then you want to put the storage in a container. The reason for this is, let's say it's MySQL for a minute. So I've got all my log, all my logs, all my data, and I'm missing something. Probably my configuration file. All right, sorry, that's too deep. All right, so let's say I got logs and data, right? Okay, great. Indexes. Now, this container dies. Or better yet, I want to go from 5.1 to 5.5. Woohoo, yay, we're upgrading. Okay. If I stop this container and delete it, I lose all the data. It's gone. If, however, I stop this container doesn't even need to be running all of the data in it. I can spin up the 5.5 container, run the update script, attaches to this. Life is good. What's even cooler is I can make a quick copy, you know, an image copy of this, then do the upgrade, and if it fails, I still have everything I need to run 5.1, you know, because I can start those containers in a second. Oof, just like that. So you get that kind of immutability. So yes, you do want to separate your data into a container. Or what a lot of people are doing in the cloud, particularly in Amazon, is they're shipping that out to SSDs on EBS, so they get guaranteed IOPS to the container. They're not even containerizing the data. They just know they can attach that volume. So
a separate state, but it's still not as far as separation as you wanted from the microservice.
that's an interesting question. I don't have a good answer for you. Because
Well, it doesn't take over the whole machine, so you don't get the advantages.
that's correct. And you could take that EBS volume and attach it to a different machine as well if something were to go wrong with the host, which happens a lot in AWS. So relatively speaking.
So if in the virtual machine environment, you never run two databases on the same physical machine in two different VMs? Because they would.
If you're talking about the public cloud, you don't know. You have no notion of what physical machines you're running on. So you don't know if you're
like you're running your own database. But
So-
if you spin up your own VMs, you never run two databases on the same machine. Can't use the hardware efficiently then? Or?
So I've only dealt with that situation personally a couple of times, and in both cases, we made the decision to run our databases on bare metal. Right. So I don't have any experience with
As a
that.
rule of thumb, I do not virtualize databases.
Yeah.
Weird stuff has happened to me. You know, it's just, I'm not that smart.
Doesn't give you some better control.
One of the
Performance was always the issue for me,
one of the
particularly
best
IOPS.
things for me is block device utilization with MySQL is weird. It really likes disk cache, and so I've got a really bias towards a lot of RAM, you know, for the node, be it a VM or a hardware node. And I get to the point where if I really heavily utilize database servers, I have to give them a lot of RAM. Also, when I'm importing databases, so much data is moving around, it tends to tussle the other database servers that are depending on the same block devices to support them. So as a general rule of thumb, just to avoid weirdness somewhere down the line in production, I just don't do it. It's not worth it. The number of database servers I have are so few. The one exception I have is backup database servers. We're a heavy user at CPAL of MySQL replication, and so I use replication to have an up-to-date slave so I can make backups from it. Now that one I do heavily virtualize. It can slow down around here.
Yeah, and if you're only writing, you get the whole append only thing, so you don't have the I/O contention.
Right,
That you
that's
have,
what I'm
that you would
thinking.
have when you go read write. Yeah. So
Resources.
Not that smart.
Okay.
It just don't bother. I mean, our implementation of virtualization is for my team is a naive implementation of that. I mean, it's nothing terribly complicated. Actually, the way to cordon off everybody's virtual machine. When I tried to do database on it, wasn't smart enough.
there were cases in the Slice Host and then the Rackspace Cloud where what we ended up doing was going and getting the very biggest machine and paying for it that we could. Not because we needed all of that power, but just because we needed to guarantee that we were the only person on the machine, so that we got all the items. So yeah, so there's weird stuff that happens very quickly when you start to virtualize with databases.
Yeah, yeah. The big driver does inherently bad things. By
Block-
default.
Block device virtualization is always.
Touche. So reduce back to density. Reduce host means reduce cost. That's CapEx and OpEx. This doesn't address revenue growth at all, and so I don't think it's very compelling. And now, that said, remember I gave you an example where somebody did the research and went, oh my God, we can remove 990 machines from our grid, and we can decrease build times by, I think it went from 18 hours to 3 hours or something like that. That's, yeah, okay. That's real. What about tools? Basic management tools for multi-host inventory. Again, Student Fleet Stack Engine. That's a picture of our page. That's a bunch of containers across a bunch of different servers. This is Fleet. I think Fleet is really sexy, although it is a primitive. It's not meant to be, for the end user. So you got two hosts here as an example. You got the Docker daemon running directly on CoreOS. You've got their etcd daemon running directly on CoreOS. And these are the containers. If this one dies, Fleet's going to try and bring it back right here because there's space. It will not try and bring it back over here because there is no space and it recognizes that. So that's the notion of scheduling. Again, if you're interested in that sort of thing, look up the bin packing problem on Wikipedia. It's really a neat problem. So what about adoption? This is mostly a production concern. There's a lot of talk, but very little action in most cases. It turns out revolution, not evolution. If you really want to get there, you got to change a lot of stuff. And that's generally hard to do and fraught with risk. Tools for production management are hard to use. Kubernetes and Mesos are the two big boys out there. Again, Fleet is really simple, really nice, especially if you already know System B, but it's also really simple and really nice, so it's not very featureful. If you wanted to just jump in with both feet and drink all the Docker Kool-Aid right away, I would suggest just spinning up like a 3-node CoreOS cluster with an AWS account. You can do that right through their page, CoreOS's page, and go play. It's like it's not.
Is anybody in here running CoreOS?
On hardware? No, we're in AWS. Okay. But we are
There's
in
a
production.
referring to USB.
Yeah.
Included like. Just putting my toe in there. So.
And I think CoreOS on disk is only like 143 megabytes. It's tiny, right? It's totally stripped down. Rancher OS, brand new, right? They came to Container Days to sort of announce themselves. Out of California, 20 megabytes on disk. It's a race to the bottom, people. Right, so they've got some neat and sexy things they're doing too. So if you're playing with CoreOS and you're kind of digging all that, check out Rancher OS as well. Just for the hell of it. I haven't looked yet, so I don't know what you're going to find.
Sounds like name that too.
Yeah.
I could boot that hardware and 10 megabytes.
I don't see
Who's that hardware?
I don't see enough gray hair in here for it doesn't matter to anybody but you and I. So sharing. This is the last of the DevOps pillars. Disposable development environments. This is a big deal. Who in here has developers using Vagrant or is supporting the use of Vagrant with their developers? Yeah. So I need to make an admission to you again, so you kind of know where I'm coming from, right? I expect everybody to raise their hand. I live in my DevOps echo chamber over there in Austin. Everybody uses Vagrant. What do you mean you're not using Vagrant? What's wrong with you, right? Pardon me. In my last job, I walked in, they weren't using Vagrant. I said, WTF, except I used all the letters. And they went, we're not going to change. I said, okay. So I went to a couple of the younger guys, and I said, hey, Vagrant. And they went, what's that? I went, look, here's your development environment. No. So
What the fuck?
I
Why
said,
are we using
I
this?
want you to use this for 2 weeks. Don't tell anybody. Help us shake out the bugs because we were using Chef as the provider. So they had to learn a little bit of Chef too. And like I said, that's a nightmare. So 2 weeks later, I was ready to take on the first, well, I'm not going to do that. So I walk into the dev room and I say, so anybody want to use Vagrant? And they all looked up. I'm like, uh-oh. We all got it already. That's awesome, man. We measured this. We put 8 hours a week, measured. Now, I'm not making this up. We measured it. 8 hours a week billable back into their weeks. 8 hours a week, $75 an hour time, $150 an hour billable time. Back into their weeks using Vagrant. Crazy, right? Then, because it's all the chef recipes, I said, another Eliyahu Gold, right? It's not luck, not the goal, it's the sequel. The value of something in the marketplace is what the market is willing to pay, not how much work we put into it. So the $60 rack space machine that we were running MasterCard's infrastructure on, we charged them $1,000 a month, and they were thrilled to pay. Because their IT couldn't do it for them, and we weren't inside their compliance bubble, right? Because we were just doing marketing properties for them. They were thrilled to pay $1,000 a month. So by the time we were done, after a year, measured $1.8 million between the cost savings and and opening up that new revenue stream. And this was just an $80 million company. That's a significant amount of money, right? So I had a nice bonus that year. Definition of a fully functional development environment that can be brought up in minutes or even seconds. So this was the original Vagrant, what do you call it? Brand, I guess, before there was HashiCorp.
Mascot.
Yeah, mascot. Thank you. Benefits. New team members are productive on the first day. Innovation. We can try things new quickly. I want to upgrade PHP. I did this, right? I told you I wrote that framework in PHP. So I wanted to upgrade from PHP 5.1 to 5.3. I was excited. Really cool features, a couple of object-oriented things I really, really needed. And a whole lot of bugs in 5.3.1. Damn. It took me 2 days to get my development environment back so that I could keep working. Ouch, right? With Vagrant, upgrade your stuff. Didn't work. Cool. Git pull, got my Vagrant file back, Vagrant up, I'm back to work. 15 minutes, done. I can try and upgrade anything. Now, if you're in the Java world, that really matters, right? Because you can really jack things up by upgrading Java. But if you're doing it on a virtual machine, all you got to do is Vagrant destroy, Vagrant up, and you're back to where you were. And what's even cooler with sharing is, let's say that I move to Java 1.9. I run all the tests. I do all the things. Life is good. And I'm like, okay, guys, all 10 of my colleagues here, let's all upgrade to Java 1.9. So that means everybody stops work and they start taking their hand-built artisanal bespoke environments, and they start doing all their hand-built bespoke things, right? Yay. 2 days later, everybody's back and going. No. In the Vagrant world, you get pull, Vagrant up, you're upgraded, go. Now I want to be really clear, if you're not familiar with the paradigms, it's only a couple people raise their hand. The code that I am working on is on the host. So I get to use I don't have to install an IDE on the virtual machines or anything like that. The IDE lives on my Mac. I code, and I am mounted. The guest has mounted that directory so that any code changes are seen on the guest immediately. So if I'm using Python, I only need to go through a compile step. It just works. That's pretty awesome, right? So with Docker, with Docker, it's just instead of a Vagrant file, it's a Docker file. And instead of waiting a minute for your virtual machine to come up, you wait less than a second. That's kind of amazing. Now, I don't know about you guys, I've racked and stacked my own hardware. 2 weeks to me, when we went to Rackspace, 2 weeks to get a new machine, seemed pretty awesome to me. I was like, yeah, okay, and I don't have to rack and I don't have to stack. This is cool. And then the cloud came, and I could have a machine in a minute. Literally, like a minute. And I thought, wow, miracle of miracles. There'll never be anything better than this, or it won't matter. Turns out it did. Because even waiting a minute can see me go to check my email, and that's a rabbit hole I could never get out of. So just being able to click over, absolutely amazing. Concerns, competes. The big thing is developers will make a configuration change, either in a Vagrant development environment or a Docker development environment. And that doesn't get properly communicated up the chain to QA or production because they're not using like a chef provider or Puppet or something like that to keep things consistent. And life gets very, very bad very, very fast. Because then you get into, well, working on my machine. Yeah, that's really doing me a lot of good while we've been here 48 hours trying to get it working, right? bastard operator from hell. So if you go to the register and you search for VOFH, it's from, I think it started back in 1995. I got that right? And it's just, like service desk. My computer's broke. Why do I care? Click, that sort of stuff. That's where the neckbeard thing comes from. So this significantly increases feature velocity, but again, it increases feature innovation. It doesn't look good, though. The developers can go super fast, but if all their stuff just lands in source control, you're host. You're not making any more money. People have been doing that. Vagrant came along. The thing that makes Vagrant so cool is it's yeah, I know.
You're tough.
Yeah, exactly. Try using VMware Fusion raw. I mean, oh, geez. Great power savings, sucks everywhere else. Vagrant's really cool because what it does is it basically takes and describes your virtual machine in a Ruby file that then gets checked into source control. So that's where you get all the niceness from source control. You get pull, I don't know what TeamCity is, I've never used it. Whatever it is, you just check it out, poof, you got it, right? So
Vagrant to VirtualBox is just like Docker that's contained LC.
LXC? Yeah, something, yeah, exactly. Now it's from your models, right? It's easier to share. And then you get to boot to Docker. Boot to Docker is basically to VirtualBox, the Vagrant is to VirtualBox. It's for Windows and Mac machines. If you're already on Linux, you don't need it. But boot to Docker basically just under the covers, it spins up a virtual machine for you, and then aliases a bunch of ports so that you can just run Docker commands natively on your Mac or your Windows machine. I was told, I taught a class on this at Container Days, and then I was told by a couple of people who were more advanced that there's something out there called Kitematic that's even better than boot to Docker. I haven't checked that out yet, but there were so many people who were so enthusiastic about it. A couple of them like really serious, really high-end dudes that I thought I would mention it here. And then Docker Compose is really neat, even though it only works on one machine. I know it was bashed on a little bit ago. But if you think about the stack engine topology that I described a little bit ago, we have one machine in production, stamped out 3 times. It has 3 containers on it, app, license, and admin. And then we have a load balancer and a database, right? So I can cram all 5 of those containers on one virtual machine, and I can describe that with Docker Compose, and it'll figure things out in the right order for me and all that. It's just a YAML file. So I can just say Docker Compose up, and I get all 5 of those containers, and I can work on everything at once. So I can have everything up and running. So if my app container depends on the license container, I can work, I can test, I can do all of my integration testing and stuff like that. So Docker Compose is a neat thing if you're already looking at Docker development.
Do you like to run all that on one host?
On one guest, you mean? Yeah, I do actually. 1, because that's how we are running this production, and 2, because I'm not trying to do load testing there. When we load and stress, we load and stress out on the same machines that we're running in production. So I'm just developing. I'm really worried about functional stuff and my development cycle time. So. Adoption. This is a really common adoption path too. There's a reason I have these curmudgeons here. It's typically done in lieu of Vagrant. Oftentimes, what I've found is that people know about Docker. They're doing cool Docker things. They never heard of Vagrant. They skipped over it. And it often gains traction with QA, which again is amazing to me. I've seen so many QA people get so excited about Docker and really drive this, into the development team and the build team. And to me, that is really significant because QA is really anathema of change, right? No, don't change that. We have to test now, right? So that's not cool. So QA is like, yeah, change this. This is better. I get excited about that. All right, so let's wrap this up. Some food for thought. We talked about immutable infrastructure. We talked about A/B deployments. This goes away. And this leads to A/B testing for marketing. Netflix is known for this, right? Google is doing this to you all the time. Sometimes you have to opt in. You're like, I'd like to try the new thing with Drive or whatever. But basically, you put out the new stuff. You route 10% of your traffic to it. You measure. Ooh, measure. That's one of those pillars of DevOps, right? And what do? Well, hey, this thing's measuring out better. Okay, let's route 50% of the traffic to it. Okay, it's holding up to all the load and stuff like that. Stop these. Bring this up to load. I'm now released. And we have measured that the features that we put out in production were actually going to be better. No more project manager, also known as the good idea theory. Saying, woohoo, bling, you should move the button over here. Bling, we need rounded corners, not square corners. We can actually go and measure things. It boggles my mind. I'm actually offended, like all the way to my soul, that marketing is more metrics driven than engineering. This bothers me. We need to fix this. That should be a DevOps pillar. Be more metrics driven than marketing. All right. Future packs. This guy is David Strauss. He lives in San Francisco. His head is that big, and his brain is bigger. I don't know how he does that. It's like an end space thing. Okay. David runs. He's the CTO of Pantheon. He's a contributor to he's a code contributor to some D, things like that. So you were asking about LXC earlier. What Pantheon did way back. David came to Austin DevOps in 2013, and he talked about how Pantheon is using containers back then. So back in October 2013, Docker was just a twinkle in .cloud's eye. It really didn't exist as Docker yet. Okay, so what they were doing there is this: they run Drupal, and you can go to Pantheon right now, and you can go and you can get Drupal, and you will get a fully featured Pantheon Drupal. You can do with it whatever you want. What makes this work for them is that Drupal is running in a container, and that Drupal only runs when a request is made. So imagine that I have thousands of containers sitting on a machine. All they're doing is taking up this space. None of them are running because these are all just a bunch of little itty-bitty websites that, like my pet blog. Yay, okay, 5 people read that each month. Well, so when a request hits the machine, hits the socket. The socket goes, oh, that's this guy. Bam, starts that container. We're only adding 50 to 100 milliseconds to the request. Poof, website is served, and then the caching so it stays up for 5 minutes in case there's a request. Blah blah blah. Then it shuts down. They're running this on Rackspace hardware. So they're not using the Rackspace cloud at all, to answer your question about hardware. Okay? So they're running this on Rackspace hardware. They have, I think he said, roughly 120 machines running over 1 million containers in this way. That was from 2013. That's a year. But that really informs the thinking, right? Because Docker makes this easier to consider in our own context now. We don't need to hook up the socket and system D and contribute code to these crazy projects and all that stuff. We can use Docker and get to that if that sort of thing makes sense to us. But I thought that was just amazing. Salespeople call that a reverse pipeline, which essentially means your customer can just come in and start using things, and only when they decide this is worth money to pay for because I'm going to get bigger, they have to pay. And at that point, they want to pay. So it sells itself.
So it was free before then? It was free?
The service is free. Yeah, Pantheon is free. And then as you want to scale it up, you pay.
Okay, so Heroku could do this. I guess, right?
Right. You would have,
it takes like a minute to spin up.
but you would have to take the application Drupal in this case, and you have to Herokuize it, and it's not.
Because Heroku is going the other way there. They're turning off their free service.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
it's free for 12 hours a day. So.
Yeah, and then let's say you want to hook up New Relic. Boy, is that your checkbook is gonna squeak. Heroku gets very expensive very fast. If you're looking at Heroku, that's great. Play with Heroku, be careful. And then if you really want platform as a service, look at Deis or DIES. Optimand is the company that creates it. There's another one. If you just want to play with platform as a service in a very simple way, DOKKU, Doku. It's a Jeff Lindsay container. I'm sorry, a Jeff Lindsay thing. And basically what it does is platform as a service on a single machine. So you can kind of play with that platform as a service model with Docker. And go, oh, I like this. And then go and figure it out in a bigger way. So at the point when you get to this, you end up with robots and unicorns. And as we all know as ops people, robots and unicorns are the ultimate, right? Especially unicorns that can shoot rainbows out of their horn. Because Docker makes containers available to people like me, mere mortals. So closing thoughts, how do we determine if Docker is worth investigating? From a business perspective, Docker adoption is only valuable as a first step. The developer adoption of Docker is only valuable as a first step. There's enough benefit alone there to justify the effort. It must inform the system architecture and production operations over time if you're going to realize the full benefit. In other words, if you can't get the benefits into production, you're not producing any new revenue, you're probably wasting your time that could be spent there or elsewhere. Docker system architecture ramifications have the potential to provide a significant and lasting competitive advantage. Remember, though, they're very, very hard. Don't go running off going, microservice all the things. No, think about that. Determine whether that's right for you. And if it's right for you, don't try and do it with all the things. Identify the right things to be doing. Unlike most ops-driven improvements derived from applying DevOps thinking, this one's coming from QA and developers. As a manager, as a people manager, that means that you're going to have ops guys going, wait a minute, I'm the revolutionary here. I'm the thought leader. What are these? Right? I know that sounds trivial and maybe even small, but that's how people are. If you're ready for that, you can head it off before it becomes a problem. Horses are starting to become unicorns, so here it is, the meme, evolve or die. You tired of hearing that? Yeah, me too. That's crap. Horses are becoming unicorns, but not all horses need to be unicorns. There's plenty of room out there for horses because we don't want unicorns aren't going to pull plows. All right, so do you need to become a unicorn? That's the real question. So from a DevOps perspective, we as DevOps thought leaders must determine how a Docker adoption path looks in our organization in terms of our culture. The tools aren't there yet, and companies are showing up with a mission to address this, but it's very early days. So in other words, if you're going to go and adopt the Docker now, you are probably going to write a whole lot of your own code to manage what you're doing. Or you're going to have to go and engage with a company like us, like Tudum, like CoreOS with Fleet, and really inform them and their growth as they are building the tool, the tooling that's going to be needed for companies out there. Lean. DevOps thought leaders are responsible for the holistic impact of technology decisions at the business level. We're not on our own, okay? We should be going out and getting project managers, directors of business operations, marketing people, and having a discussion with them to determine if they believe the value is there. And if we can't explain it, remember what Einstein said. Great scientists can make science understandable. Good scientists can't. We need to be great scientists. Measurement. Empiricism is required if we're going to meet our measurement obligation. Black box thinking could revolutionize compliance. So imagine that instead of governance, I'm trying to tell you what has to be in the container. Instead, as an operations person, I take a step back and I just start writing tests. If you can pass all of these tests that we all agree on as compliance, then your container may go to production. That's a whole different conversation between two people than your container sucks because it doesn't meet these specifications, right? Instead of a human telling another human, no, that is not good enough, we have robots saying, that's not good enough. And that's a much easier conversation on anybody's ego. Sharing. DevOps thought leaders should be working with peers and collaborators in their company to determine if they can derive the proposed benefits. Again, we are not alone in this. We should not be alone in this. This is a holistic business opportunity that we need to evaluate in just that way. So should you be considering a Docker adoption? That's entirely up to you. I'd be happy to talk through it some more if you have more detailed questions or anything like that. There's a bunch of the books that I had mentioned. How many of you have read this? Great. For those of you who did not raise your hand, sorry if you already did. Buy this book. Read it. If I wasted your time, fine me. I'll refund your money. Your $10, and the next time in Houston, I'll buy your lunch. Somebody wrote a novel about your life. I know at page 50, I was yelling at the book. It's not the sand! Find the asshole who's changing stuff and make them stop! The people on the plane were trying to get the pilot to land. That was kind of out there.
It's a pretty easy read too. It's not a big thing.
I'm dyslexic. It took me about 9 hours to read, and I read really, really slow. So yeah, it is a very easy read.
That's one that it's worth reading and it's fairly easy to read. So it's not like you're going to be dedicating yourself to reading Doom or something.
The Stand. What do you mean? The other thing I should point out too is this book right here is a derivative work. Now that's usually a very negative thing to say about a book, but Gene Kim himself says I ripped off the goal. So for those of you who got the goal reference earlier, this book is a derivative work of the goal. So I read this. This book is about a manufacturing plant. What I thought was really cool is when I read this book, actually I listened to it. Audible.com is the shizzle, man. So if it doesn't have a star next to it, you can get it on Audible. So like that commute that you have in Houston, you can get smarter just listening to stuff. I listened to the goal, and each problem that was presented throughout the story. Again, it's like a love story and all this other crap to it.
Yeah, this the whole marriage counseling.
Yeah.
I mean, God, the thing would be half the size.
Yeah, and I like the audiobook too because it's a play.
I didn't finish it. It was getting so ridiculous about you getting back together with his wife.
I don't know. As a recovering workaholic, I kind of found it pretty poignant myself. Right? This is theory of constraints. And what I found really interesting is not knowing the first thing about manufacturing. For each problem that was sort of presented to the team and whatnot, I was able to figure out with about 50% accuracy what the solution was going to be. And so I thought that was a pretty good kill rate, just because, like I said, I don't know the first thing about manufacturing. I thought, wow, the power of this 4 ways and other things, really, it really matters. If I can reason my way through a manufacturing problem just by doing this sort of thinking, then this is really worth my time. So then after that, I got to It's Not Luck, which is another Gold Rat book, which is basically the continuing story of Rogo.
More marriage counseling?
No, she is a marriage counselor at that point. This is where I took the statement, the value of a thing is not how much work you put into it, but what the market is willing to pay. That's a double-edged sword. Like I said, we were spending $60 a month on cloud servers for MasterCard properties. We were charging them $1,000. That's to our good. The team that I left in frustration when I left that job had already spent $7 million on a big data project for analyzing social media. Hadn't had a customer yet because nobody was willing to pay for it because it was crap. So that was $7 million of work that wasn't worth anything, right? So that's a double.
They need to read the Lean Startup Day.
This is great, right?
Wow, it's great.
And like I mentioned in here, they talk about, because most of y'all are enterprise folks, they talk about Intuit here a lot. So Reese went to Intuit, talked to them, and then Humble, he wrote this one, which is like the Bible of. Humble is the author of the paper 10 deploys a day. That's where the whole thing started. Lean Enterprise is basically the Lean Startup done at the enterprise level instead. I haven't read it yet. I have a copy, and I need to get to it. So, in any event, all these are worthwhile. If you haven't read this, this guy. It's not a joke. This guy Sutton's a Stanford researcher. He went out of his way and he defined the word asshole, and then said, I know I'm using this word. If you identify assholery in your organization, stamp it out. Don't tolerate it. It's far more destructive than, so remove these people. No matter what the cost, it will be worth it in the end to remove assholes from your organization. And I've actually seen that in action. It's amazing.
You wrote another book called The Knowing Doing Gap.
Yes.
Which is all about entities, organizations that know exactly what to do, but they don't do it.
Yeah.
And how you solve that problem.
Education. Yes. Having been a teacher for 10 years.
Education, because they already know what to do. They just are not doing it. I guess everybody knows to go to the doctor now, right?
No, wait. No. It's a question. Again, I really do, I sincerely hope that you guys can walk out of here and say, I really need to go and look into this because there were these 2 things he mentioned that really could benefit us, or none of that stuff matters. So, for what we're doing, we're really into our puppet stuff. That's gonna get us most of the way to where we want to be. We're good, at least for now. We'll revisit that in here, whatever. But I hope you walk out knowing more about Docker, what the impacts potentially could be in your business. Reasoning from some of the experiences that we've seen out there, and that you understand that there is help available out there. Not just through Stack Engine, IRC. The Docker community is very, very friendly. Unlike the Nginx community. You've been in that channel too, have you?
No, I have colleagues I've worked with.
Oh, okay.
I just take it from them.
I was just going to say, I can tell you what they're going to say. Read the documentation.
Nothing is as bad as free radius. You have to read mailing lists with all the posts from Terra.
So great. So in the Chef channel, right? So you go to Pound Chef, right? How people find this, I don't know, because it's IRC, right? But I'm sitting in the Chef channel. I'm trying to pay back my karmic debt to all the people who helped me get started. So somebody comes in and they actually ask for cooking advice. You laugh. This happens once or twice a week.
So,
What's awesome is there are several guys in there who are like gourmet chefs. Paul Zarkowski over in Austin being one. He told this woman how to make queso ice cream. It was his award-winning queso ice cream. He gave her the recipe for it. I've told people, if you want to make pasta, you need to do this and not that. You use less semolina, more flour. So that's how friendly that. You do that engine X. How do I fix my engine? You're going to learn a lot of foul Russian language really fast.
Do puppeteers show up at Town Puppet?
It used to be the puppet community was pretty stodgy. In the last 6 to 8 months, they realized that Chef was crushing them on the community side. Chef has an amazing community. I mean, like nothing else. And Puppet has realized that and is trying to correct it. And from what I've seen in Austin, they've made really good strides, which I think is really critical for a project like that. So have you activated the Puppet community at all? Are you reaching out on IRC or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would spend a lot of time on IRC. IRC is one of my main resources.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been through varying waves of Puppet, community where I've met some of the guys who work there and they've been really helpful. So at some point there's a lot of, you're doing this wrong. Every time you try to have any conversation about a problem, the answer is, well, you're wrong, you're doing it wrong, and it's not right, and you're not approaching things correctly, and all this other stuff. And in some respects, that is, there are a lot of people who try to jam Puppet into places that belong.
I have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right, where they just use it as like a scripting language, So there is kind of sometimes need for that, but the community, I think sometimes, like especially with DevOps, is kind of becoming more of a bigger thing. It's kind of a fledgling thing. It started getting more, attention. All the guys who were already there kind of made them feel like, well, I was here first, so I get to tell everybody, what I feel about them. So anyway, I mean, lately I haven't really been paying attention to it.
Chef had the other problem.
But IRC for me is like the last thing.
Oh.
It's like at day 3.
Wow, you have a lot of patience. It's like Google, Stack Overflow, IRC.
Source code. You missed the source code.
Oh, yeah.
So regarding,
I'm an evangelist. I don't do that anymore. Ouch. Sorry.
So getting back to Docker, so one of the things now, maybe I'm mischaracterizing this. From an ops guy, and this is kind of what we were talking about a little bit before we started, was, I kind of envision, like, let's say, my company needs some product, right, and some software. And we're going to go somewhere and say, okay, we want this software, we're installing it on our servers, you need to provide it to us, right? Now that happens by, they provide us a tarball or an RPM or whatever needs to happen. I kind of envision at some point somebody's going to say, well, here's our Docker container,
It happens for demos.
It's actually already happened. It's already happened. CoreOS doesn't have a package manager. So everything you do in CoreOS installs. Okay.
So we have a little bit of experience with that in virtual machine land. They made appliances like VMware. You can download appliances, which is like, or Cacti is one of them you can download. It just runs. It's a VM, you plug it in, it runs, right? So Docker seems like it would be similar, right? Like a similar idea, right? You're just taking this kind of container and plugging it in, and it's working, right?
I can give you some examples. I did this thing when I did a demo of a product called Use Your Own Stack Adventure. One of them is zero to production. And what I do is I bring up a bunch of fun components on the machine. One of them is called logspout. So bring up logspout. What it does is it attaches to the actual Docker socket and host. Right? It watches for Docker. When a new container comes out, Docker only logs the standard out and standard in. From within the container. That gets written down on the host at bar with Docker or something. So what logspout is it's watching it. And so you can actually go and read a blog post on stackengine.com where you can hook this up to Papertrail. Papertrail the Papertrail is a log aggregation as a service, like Splunk, cheap. So boom, you have all your logs going right into Papertrail like that. And all of the containers running on that host. Then I hooked up something called Docker Console. So that's the console service discovery software running as a container. And I run Registrator. So what Registrator does is it watches the Docker software events. It will register any service it sees as long as you give it some environment. with console, so that then any other service going in looking for something can just say console and it works. Then I have Datadog. They have the best container story right now, as far as monitoring the services. So you can of course want to install a Datadog agent and get installed Datadog or whatever, but you can also just run your Docker containers. Not only watch your host, but also watch your containers in some library as well. So by the time I'm done, in about 20 minutes, I have log aggregation, monitoring, and now none of these things are like personal. I have service discovery, and I usually run some silly little Python Flask just to show that, hey, it's all working together, and everything's telling each other like it's supposed to. So from the perspective of, I have this cacti appliance, and I can spin it up, and it just sort of finds everything.
I wouldn't talk about that. Just the general concept of an app inside of
A black box.
Right. Well, I guess where I'm going with this is that now I have a black box running in my environment. Now Heartbleed comes out.
I'm not familiar with Heartbleed.
You've never heard of Heartbleed? Nope. It's like
You're a shell shock.
Oh yeah. Oh, Heartbleed. I'm sorry. I thought you said Heartbleed.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I
Heartbleed.
definitely. Yeah.
I was like,
everybody's
heard of Heartbleed.
Yeah, Heartbleed is right. That was 70 hour day. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So I mean, I guess that's where I'm going with this. Like with Docker, am I going to be in the same situation where I have another company shipping me this kind of container that's just magically works by itself, but now I need to patch it, right? So now I'm relying on them to provide me with patches. Is that what I am? Because now if I'm running on a Linux VM, I just do an update. Update pulls in the updated OpenSSL library, and now I'm done. Right?
There's no patches in a Docker.
It's actually a bit more insidious than that. So imagine, think about what I just described. I had to start Logstop before I started anything else to do. Let's see the event of the other after the log. Right? So let's say that Logspot was a thing that was crippled, and you don't update it in place. If you're drinking the Kool-Aid. Now, I'm not saying you can't or that you shouldn't. I'm saying that if you're following, it's not reproducible. Right. So what I want to do is I want to stop that existing one and put the new one in its place, right? I think about that from what I just said from an orchestration perspective. Stop it, and I start this new one. It's not aware of all the containers running on the machine. I have to restart all the containers running on the machine. There's orchestration in a nutshell, right? So,
Need some state.
I have
Makes
like
sense
that
some
one.
state.
So, and then to restart all those services on the machine, they may be restarted in a particular order. Right? So the only answer to this is you have to keep in mind about Docker. It isn't truly enterprise ready in the sense that you want to run your important things. If you have a bunch of front-facing web applications, probably could do that. As long as that property, if it had to be down for an hour because something went wrong and it took an hour to figure it out, that's okay. Somebody may get puffy or whatever. Nobody's going to die. You aren't losing thousands of dollars a minute or whatever. Yeah, it's good. But if you're talking about trying to run SAP, it's nowhere near it. It's not near front end. And then the basic practices that you all have been asking about, they are developed. They're not there. And
World is your place.
yeah, and it's raggedly, and you can also say it's greenfield, right? Go make up whatever you want to do. Feel good, but let's face it.
Code it yourself, bro.
The reason we're operations people is we're not hippies. That's for developers. I'm sorry.
I'm going to ask that. Do you tend to run a small app, small database? Do you tend to just build that on one container, or do you try to separate?
If you're asking me personally, it depends. Because I just do R&D. It depends on what I'm trying to figure out. I can cause I/O contention by running the database and a couple of the same web application on the same host. If I'm not if I don't have a fast EBS volume around it or something. If I were doing it for reals, so our Docker implementation right now.
Let's say you got unlimited everything. Just from the managing everything.
I
be a CPU disconnect from network.
what were your name?
Scott, I'm sorry.
I completely agree. Now remember, I am a MySQL DBA certified the whole nine. I completely agree with Scott. I'm going to run every database I can. If I'm unlimited resources, I'm going to run databases on bare metal. And I'm going to have somebody. I'm going to have the best Oracle DBA that I can find, and I am going to put him on a pedestal, or her on a pedestal, and I'm going to make sure that everybody worships. Because let's face it, data is where the money is, right? So. Now, there are some neat things you can do with virtualization, but ultimately most of that you can accomplish with like LVM, right? So yeah, we would probably, I don't know, you guys can use LVM for your backups.
No.
Make sure you're,
I wish we did.
yeah. So
I
especially
used
if
to slave.
if you're using Postgres, you don't even have that problem. You actually have to stop the database to get a backup because of the red hat.
Let's say you got a bunch of tiers. Inside the database, you got a reverse proxy, Nginx in front of us. Now it's a bunch of apps, which you run them all in separate containers.
If I were starting, I'm taking your question to be, if I were going to start from zero, if I were going to go start a technology company with a cool idea, and I was going to use containers, what would I do? I would start at microservices. So yes, I would try and conceive of the application architecture as one service per container in such a way that I can intelligently move those containers around. If I were writing something very sassy, in the sense that, like Facebook, I know that's ungodly, right? But I would want to think about those containers such that they could be anywhere in the world, and then my application would eventually be smart enough to know that somebody's making a request in Australia, the containers in Australia, in the Australian data center should service them. So I would be thinking that long term and building towards it, not for it, right? Towards it. So we would definitely be making decisions that don't get us there in the short term to get us to driving. But I would definitely start with a microservice architecture. I see the benefits as far too great to fits if it fits the use. Now, if I'm doing scientific computing, there's some guys at the Texas Advanced Computing Center that are using it, but they're using it just because this guy did some research for his master's degree. He learned food, so he's got this food container. Right now, dude comes along and wants to write his PhD thesis and realizes that this food work is something he wants to build upon. He can just Dr. Pull the food container. So the attack is actually trying to get better metadata in the container for provenance, so that when you figure out who is trying to do what, who did what when, for who invented what patents and so forth. You have all the provenance of the research built right into the containers because you have the layers that you build up. I know it's late, and you look like you want to go, and so I just want to say to anybody, you're not going to hurt my feelings.
I really appreciate it. It's super interesting. I've like an hour
And I'll be the first one to say wife maintenance is cheaper than wife repair. So
that is very true.
We got the 2 hour right
I'm staying overnight. So let me ask you this really quick. Just comments on the talk. I'm going to do this very talk at InnoTech on Thursday in San Antonio. So
I like it. It's good.
thank you. It was
Please
informative.
ping me.
I will. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah. So yeah, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Have a good night. Hope to see you soon. Cheers. What other questions or comments?
And looking at Anson, because it's so easy. Yeah. So that's something you would steer people from.
He doesn't steer.
I do.
Yeah, I don't want to. I
So-
don't want to make the investment, and 2 years later, it's not really.
Yeah, you'll never know that in the end, right? I mean, that's analysis by paralysis by analysis. I think that for
Chef is the same.
yeah, chef in my mind, and then I'm stocking chef. I think chef is your safest bet, but the paradigm, if you're an operations person, it's really hard to drop because it's very developer focused. You have to understand source control pretty deeply you have to understand the development process, because Chef says, I am developing code. My infrastructure is actual living code, and that code is the documentation to my infrastructure. So that's development. And so we're not developers as operations people, right? So that can be really intimidating or simply ungroppable because we're just not wired that way. For me, I went from developer to operations. It felt really, really comfortable. Puppet, I think, is much more droppable by operations. I define what I want, I say go, and magic happens, and I get what I want. And then what I've seen with some more sophisticated shops like Austin, they do this really cool thing. They have I think it's Sensu set. And it's running on every machine. And they have a set of tests that are constantly running that check the state of the machine. And anything that falls out of whatever Puppet says it's supposed to be, they throw alerts saying this machine is not in compliance with fix it. So that's pretty damn cool. Bankview, Bancvue. And Matt's last name. He's the guy who was explaining to me how to do it. I was so geeked out over that. So I think Puppet is much more rockable by the sysadmin. Both of them have, and please tell me if I'm wrong. I think both of them have extraordinary speed. Ansible, I think, is stupid. There's something even stupid easy, which is Fabric. If you're already writing Python, Fabric was long before Ansible or any of this stuff. It just basically allows you to SSH different things in parallel, and then you can define Python operations to run. And so you can check out
what you mentioned about the core list.
Oh no, Fleet. Fleet is the distributed. Okay. Fleet is a distributed init system. You know, so there was System 5, and there was Upstart. Now there's System D, and Fleet is just System D with a few extras that allow it to run across an entire fleet of machines. Or less calls a cluster of machines. Fabric is just a Python module that does some really cool stuff. I used it to do our releases of Feed Magnet. So Feed Magnet, we wrote the SaaS application with a MySQL database that was meant to keep up with Twitter. That was going to fail, right?
We'll start with Rails.
Well, it was Python Django, but about the same thing. And so they called me and they say, hey, there's something wrong with our database. And I looked at it and I'm like, not really. Well, we want to hire you. Okay. So I was employee number 5 at Feed. And I got there and it was falling down all over the place because they, you know, if you write an application and it has to have all the caches up to work, something's wrong with your application. You can't restart a cache server and have it at least live. It's broken. So this was a real problem. And we were about to go out of business. When I signed on, they only had 3 months left. We were about to go out of business when AOL, of all companies, came in and said, we want to pay you $60,000 for South by Southwest to do your Feed Magnet thing. Bring in all these different social media channels and display them and say, kick-ass. And then AOL was rebranding, and they thought this would be really great. And so, first question out of the salesperson's mouth, boy, will the thing live? And I'm like, no. We had to solve this, and we had to do it in about 2 weeks. So my answer was, we stood up another whole new one. Henry Ford style, right? Model T number 1, Model T number 2. And it worked. And we survived. Now, $60,000 at that time was 4 months runway for us. So we had 4 more months. So what we did was we redesigned the application from the ground up. We ripped out all the caching, everything. We redesigned it from the ground up as a basic MySQL Django app. And every time we got a customer, because we were feeding that PC, just stamp out another one. So I did that with bash scripts. And after about the 20th customer, it was easy. I could stand up another customer in minutes. I wanted to update something, so that's where I got into Fabric. But that fell down really fast because now I have like 60 machines. So that's where I ended up going to Puppet. And then I couldn't quite get over the hump of Puppet in about a week. And so he said, you should really look at Chef. Looked at Chef and like, slid in May, just in time for this big push of customers that we had reached from South by Southwest. I mean, Chef really did save my bacon. And so at one point we had as many as 80 customers. We were on the homepage of GE. We did the BlackBerry 10 launch in England, which doesn't say any BlackBerry cares. Right? In England, apparently everybody cares because I took three 15 gigabyte MySQL servers, master slave, and 20 web servers. And we were processing over 300,000 social media tweets, social media posts, really, not just tweets, an hour. And we were getting 5 million incidents. But all of that was just done in the just one. That was a scaling model, right? So no one had me before. I gave all that up to go be the director of DevOps at W2O because they said, "We'll double your salary, just come and work for us." And W2O had been a customer feedback, so they literally did. They doubled my salary, and went there and we did a lot of cool things.
Did you get an article? Kevin Casey, the guy who was the evangelist for in Austin.
I have not.
But that's a great one about the advantages and disadvantages of being an evangelist for a big company. Like, it opened my eyes. It's kind of.
I was employee number 1. So there were 3 founders under me.
And then an evangelist?
Yeah, now we're, that's nice. And that, well, remember at the time, I was still able to engineer. Today, not so much. And we're 10 now.
There were some things you pointed out where you couldn't be an evangelist for like out or something.
It already is. It's wearing out. I mean, I'm wired to build things. Building a brand is fun, but the other thing is I get to do cool. This is fun to me, I mean, especially this part of the town. Especially like learning more about that. You know, we had Thomas Mann come in and actually do a talk about it. Yeah, he came to do the whole salt thing. It's very impressive. But why use salt? Maybe it is this. There's like puppet apply. The puppet apply. If something went wrong, you got to ship back and say something went wrong. Or you get stuff back saying this happens. This salt, you just have to do that. That was my experience. You got to be kidding me. You know, trust but verify is sort of the credo of the sysadmin, right? So I just trust. Sure. I'm freaking out. I'm sorry.
You guys are up here. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. So Docker container, it basically allows you to access information quicker and at least a little bit more efficiently from the server side, like when someone's trying to access it from like a web page. But think about how can the Docker implementation be done like pushed to like say an extension on a web browser or like an application? Like what kind of implications does that have? Something like that was done, or is that even something that it could be meant to be done?
Are you saying that you want to run the web browser in Docker?
No, rub a Docker container of web extension.
Sounds like ActiveX to me.
Java.
Okay, so that's
Well, the Docker container is meant to contain the thing. It's not meant to be wrapped in something else. I guess.
okay.
Yeah, something that's
Yeah, it's not
roughly
a problem.
analogous
It's
to
a-
the
yeah,
sandbox
it's-
in web browser. You have sandbox.
So
So
it's like you want to demand inside of that browser.
Architectures for like protecting the browser.
So what I've seen that turned on its head. Like for instance, you want to
like essentially, if you wanted to run your container in 3 different browsers, Safari, Chrome, and Firefox, you just build it once.
I guess I don't understand the concept of running the container in the browser.
So the portability of Docker and security.
So it's sandbox.
Well, you would run the browser in the container.
No,
It's sort of like
it's not a
you
deployment
have
thing.
it's just like you have a Chrome extension. Like name a Chrome extension.
LastPass.
So you use LastPass. Well, LastPass instead of running just on Chrome, LastPass runs in a Docker container, and that Docker container runs in the web browser.
So you're making the assumption. You're making 2 really important assumptions. Mine's on the Mac, right? So
Yeah.
that Mac can't run the Docker. And if it was there's a support that you want to not only implement containers, they're going to implement them to be 100% compatible with Docker.
Well, would it matter? So it would matter if you were running a container in a web browser on an operating system, so that operating system has some restrictions to doing that.
So
Or-
Docker.
My assumption is the web browser itself is going to have its own world it lives in, and as long as you can operate in that world, and in some cases it's you write it in Java and that, or you write it in whatever you write a Chrome extension in, and it lives in the Chrome extension world, and it operates in that, and the Chrome browser operates within the OS world and draws resources from the system.
So then the Chrome browser would have to understand that it had a container available. In the same, so think of it this way. Let's say that I have a virtual, I do right now, I have a virtual machine running on my host. Right? How does the Chrome browser that's running
So
on
the idea that it's a kernel restricts its operability in a browser. The idea that it's
Extension, the browser's here, and the extension talks to the browser. The
Yeah.
extension doesn't talk to the operating system or the bare metal. Docker is at the bare metal or
and that's what I'm understanding. That when you talk about when you talk about something being portable, it might just be something completely run in any browser, but just for the purpose because we already have Docker.
Yeah, so the one thing one thing you have to have with Docker is the Docker daemon. So underneath all of these Docker containers is a daemon called Docker running. And if you were to kill that Docker daemon, those containers would all go away, which is one of the problems with Docker, as opposed to something like Rocket or container apps implementation. So so you have to have the Docker daemon running. That's on the OS. So if you look at it from a process perspective, then you have Chrome running, which is its own process. So Chrome extensions only live because they are dependent upon Chrome. So they depend on the Chrome ecosystem, which has nothing to do with the Docker daemon. So Chrome would have to become aware of Docker before an extension could take advantage of a Docker container. And thus give you, I think what you want is a way to contain that extension so it can do no evil except the evil out. Right? Yeah, so that's not a paradigm I'm aware of at all. Now I can flip it on its head. When I was in Boston back in January, a guy did a lightning talk, 5 minutes of he showed how you can run a GUI application inside a Docker container and access it. And basically his use case was, I want to look at a site that I'm not sure of. And so I'm going to run my browser in a container, and if I get all kinds of bad stuff, I'm going to kill the container all the bad stuff, which is kind of cool. So people do that with virtual machines all the time now, but again, Docker becomes bad. Not to wait a minute to check out what's on that site.
all the smart viruses figure out if they're in the virtual.
Yeah.
They just wait for the real thing.
Yeah, that's
I assume a process can tell whether it's running here or not. You can't hide that fact.
That's true. Yeah, and then and ultimately too, if whatever is malicious can get a hold of the Docker socket, Docker runs through, right? Which is where somebody was asking about. I think it was the guy in the very back was asking about security concerns. That's like the attack surface is the big one, right? The attack surface is the Docker itself. That's really kind of freaking people out. But if you think about it, how many exploits have there been on the Apache process that did just that, right? How many CVs have we seen on Internet? Shell shock.
Yeah, but that's a few dozen Apache processes. Now we're talking a million hands to take over. Now you're talking a whole lot of things to take over.
Well, that's true. If you're really Dockerizing your entire infrastructure is at risk. But question: how much of your entire infrastructure is in the DMZ versus behind fire?
Well, it doesn't have to take over all at once. It just has to affect it, and then on day zero, it all gets taken over.
That's true. Yeah, which one is Ant Zero or Patient Zero?
Camp zero.
thing is, once someone has administrative access of servers that your customers are touching. They have access to the data that your customers are giving to you. Which is probably what matters anyways. Probably has the credit card data, probably is.
And yeah, that goes back to what I said. It really is. It's all about the data. Data is what it's about.
It doesn't matter if you're in the DMZ or not.
Yeah, that's true. If we get back to the data, we can watch requests. That's how
It's probably bigger problems than the data.
Well, my point of saying, oh, it's in the DMZ, you should have a defense in depth. Well, you lose a lot.
I was at this neat thing during South by. It was like 12 people experts. There were these two people from security firms. And they were saying that you cannot secure your application. The best bet is to work to identify holes and close them. Because right, and shell shock and the bad guys are always ahead. And then there's stuff like shell shock and who knows how long Heartbleed was around for years before it was discovered, right? How many bad guys do you think actually already knew about it? We're just slowly siphoning off data. How many other problems?
So what happened to Bitcoin, Mt. Gox? Apparently, the malware was in there for siphoning stuff off.
That's one of the stories.
I've been wondering about that. That's a pretty good story. Yeah.
There's S channel
There are
too.
reports of that.
And nobody heard of S channel, right? You heard of S channel?
No, that was
This was a similar vulnerability in Windows, the Windows SSL system, similar to Heartbleed, except clearly way more. It affected clients and servers and everybody in between. And we heard about it because it was so bad that Microsoft wanted to comply. Wow, really.
Until they got the patch out. But everybody disassembles the patches.
Well, no, they got the patch out, and I mean, any Microsoft person is, always applying the patches immediately anyway. It wasn't like hidden. It just wasn't like this big blast like Heartbleed. Heartbleed, it was, my girlfriend came home and she was like, on NPR today they were talking about this thing called Heartbleed. Did you ever hear?
They just had incredible marketing. I mean,
Well,
they had
yeah.
that icon or the logo, right?
I mean, the thing is, all this stuff, we made a big deal of it. So I'm very glad the security community reacted the way they did, and everybody replaced us off and all that. But man, someone's got to have access to the communication between the two servers with both of these attacks to do anything really useful. You can't
With Heartbleed, you could just any person could just open your system and act. I think S channel was similar.
I don't know the Windows.
Yeah, it was something like the same.
What's South by Southwest session?
it was a private party.
I thought it was a panel you were talking
No. So there were 12 speakers.
speakers.
That is about 60 or 70 people. It was done by the group that I used to work for, W2 group. People from Apache and people from Twitter. One guy, this
This was not recorded, I guess.
yeah, there's find it. They were talking about smart power, like they can transmit power. Apparently Tesla could do this 100 years ago. They can transmit power through the air. Yeah. And so he just took this disc and he put it near this induction coil or something. And lit up. So he's like, yeah, imagine taking your electric car, just driving into your garage, and it starts powering up. You don't plug it in.
There's some Japanese scientists that managed to wirelessly transfer energy. I think it was like 30 feet. Like it was an array pointing to a point and transferred energy. And you get into the world of you've got solar cells in space, wirelessly transmitting it to like points on the Earth that probably have a little cloud cover, if anything, in the way. Right. And then you just have a normal free world.
The general induction charging stuff you're talking about, that's going to be like the end of us because it's so inefficient. Like, in order to push that much energy, like to charge, let's say, like there's like wireless, like pads you can buy right now that just you phone on it and efficiency is so low. I mean, it does charge the phone, but you waste so much electricity doing it. And, you know, efficiency is like the big problem we have, right? Or it's using power is the big problem we have right now. So if we go to these less efficient technologies, we just need more power, which
We're spending more of that.
well, right, we're more fracking.
More stuff.
When we get into the world where the chips are nanoscale, you run into less energy usage because you don't have to push as much through the channel. Like when you have graphene chips being made that are being introduced by like IBM and being created, they're 1,000 to 10,000 times more energy efficient. So your phone that would run
Only
today.
when I can put it in my data center.
No, exactly. when your cell phone today, with just today's standards, if you use like graphene technology as a chipset, it would last a week instead of how many hours.
The biggest,
It's going to like innovation's going to kick it.
the biggest power consumer on your phone is your battery.
Oh yeah,
And
the
your
screen.
right? So I mean, processors are down. I mean, unless you're playing games, you know, processor is like, you know, 5 or 10% of power usage. So yeah, I mean, we will gain benefits of that, but it's all the human interface stuff that causes the more power draining.
True.
On the wireless car thing, short from that, on my BMW feed. BMW announced this at CES in January. Wireless charging.
Oh wow, I didn't see that.
With the idea that you just drive in your driveway, so you don't have to worry about it.
I nearly bought a Tesla. And,
But it's a real problem. Last thing you want to do is like drive home one night, be tired, the next morning. You know? It's just you gotta plug it in.
calling
Same with your phone, right?
my car won't start. Oh, it's on. I didn't charge it.
Cool. PTO day.
Telecommute, yeah. It's one of the nice things about working for a small startup. I wear yoga pants. My commute's 60 feet. That's about the distance from my bedroom to my house. Traffic in the kitchen can be kind of a bitch in the morning when I'm around. Alright. Pretty awesome.
The walls start to close in after a while, though.
I'm lucky. There are a couple of guys that live on my street that also work from home, so we get out to lunch a couple times. And sort of support group, I guess. Do you guys have any other doctor questions?
Yeah, I know, right?
Oh no, I mean, I feel like I have to be careful because I recognize that I will keep you here if you're too late. So I did appreciate the folks who are like, yeah, I want to.
Yeah, we better start to move. So we've got the route here till it was officially tonight.
So we're
Yes.
What are the tools you mentioned?
DIES, DAES. That's platform as a service, and it's opdemand.com. Gabriel Monroe gave our second keynote to Container Days. He blew everyone. These are the layers.
That's a great concept.
Thank you. I hope that was.
Thank you.
I'll be doing. Will you be in Intertech, won't you?
I've got the invite, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll do that.
So yeah, don't come to my session because it's just the same thing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I really don't develop so much because I never have.
Okay.
So like part of like the resources I'm looking into are things that kind of explain the intricacies of like network dependency. So so things like that. Like, do you know of any like resources I could draw from? Because then you start talking about
What? Okay. If I ask you the question, what layer of the network are you asking me about? Does
All
that
of
mean
them.
anything?
all of them.